for free. It's a wonderful resource. It's actually a genealogy gold mine. This is just a quick overview of some of the many databases you will find in HeritageQuest Online. It has U.S. Census from the very beginning up until 1940. It has city directories, which are terrific because whether your ancestor lived in a little town or a big city, you may very well find them in a directory, and you may even find relatives of theirs close by. Wills and Probates are on HeritageQuest. There's some military records too, including some Civil War, Revolutionary War, and others, not just American military, by the way. There are some immigration and naturalization papers. There's the Social Security Death Index from 1935 to 2014, and cemetery records that are very easy to search through the HeritageQuest interface. Some of the strengths of HeritageQuest are it's free, and you can access it at any time from your home tablet or computer. You don't have to go to the library. It's very easy to navigate. I'm going to show you how. It's also easy if you find something on HeritageQuest, you can save it to your home computer. There are a number of different databases you can search for genealogical records. And what's really great about HeritageQuest, unlike most of the genealogy sites online, is it's highly targeted. You're choosing one type of database at a time to search. That means you're usually going to get better results higher up in the results. And finally, in many cases, HeritageQuest has scans of the original document so that you can look at it with your own eyes and decide what that handwriting really says. Now, I mentioned that HeritageQuest is powered by Ancestry. That means that it has the same scans for the census, for example. Remember in the old days when we did the census on paper? Of course, many of you from 2020 may have done the census on your phone or on your computer. They really wanted us to do it that way. But in the old days, it was a piece of paper. And in the very old days, there was an enumerator who came around to every household. Those pieces of paper have been scanned. And the same ones you would see on HeritageQuest are the ones you will see on Ancestry. They're indexed the same way too. What that means is that if you're looking for somebody in the US Census, let's say you're looking for a grandfather or a father or a mother in the 1940 census, or maybe even yourself in the 1940 census, all those names have been indexed. It's the same index as Ancestry. But what makes this powerful is the fact that it's not the same as FamilySearch.org, which is also a free site. So if you can't find somebody in the Ancestry or HeritageQuest online census, try looking on FamilySearch.org. They indexed it independently and they scanned it differently. So I've, in a number of cases, looked at census paperwork that was terrible on Family Search. The contrast was awful. But on HeritageQuest, the contrast was well done because it was done by somebody else. So keep that in mind. It means you have more than one possibility when you're looking for somebody in a census, for example. How do you get started? You go to the Nyack Library homepage, and this is on the handout, by the way. This URL that you see, the web address, is on your handout. But if you just go to the Nyack Library and go to the databases page, it says to click here, or if you go down further on this same page, you will find HeritageQuest. So look for HeritageQuest and click on it. It will ask you for your Nyack Public Library card. Once you put it in, this is what you're going to see. This is the HeritageQuest homepage. It's really a clean and neat interface. another reason why I love HeritageQuest. It's very easy to find your way around on this. And at any point, if you're not sure where you are, you can always get back to this page by going up here to the HeritageQuest or going to a word that says home. So before I show you exactly how to search, I wanted to point out a couple of special features, such as research aids. If you're new, or even if you're not new to genealogy, there are a few things that they tell you that might help you. Their experts have a how to get started information. They give you a lot of information on why it's great to search the census and what you might find. And then for those of you who are not beginners, they have something called Beyond the Basics. So take a look at research aids and see if there's anything that you can learn from here. I picked up a couple of tips from the census, by the way. So this is one place I'm going to show you that's not search. Another is up here. It's maps. When you click on maps, what you will find are maps that are keyed to the federal census and to county lines. Why is that important? Well, as you know, not every state joined the Union at the same time. So the boundaries of the United States changed. In 1790, it was concentrated way over here. And of course, as the years went on, it went westward. If you're looking for somebody who was in a census in, let's say, a territory, you need to know more about when was that territory a state. So you can look here on some of these states to learn more about their boundaries and the important dates in their history. You can also look at the US by decade that would correspond to the year of the census. Remember, the census is every 10 years, starting in 1790, 1800, 1810, 1820, and so forth. So you can look by decade. Here, for example, is a map of what the Americas looked like in 1860. Why is this important? My husband has an ancestor who was born in what was then Virginia, a part of Virginia, and the year was 1860. But I knew later that that person's birthplace had been known as West Virginia. So I needed to find out what were the boundaries of Virginia and West Virginia when. This told me that if I was looking in the 1860 census, there was no West Virginia. That didn't happen until after the Civil War. So I needed to look in Virginia census records, not in West Virginia. And you'll also notice here in 1860, there's a Kansas territory that overlaps Colorado. These kinds of maps are helpful for giving you hints on where to look. Look at the size of Nebraska territory. But today, somebody who might have been born in Nebraska territory might have actually today have said that their birthplace was Montana, not Nebraska territory. So think about using this map by decade if you're looking for somebody and can't find them in the correct state or the state you think that they were born or married or living in. Back to the home page. Let's take a look at how do you search. Here's the search. It couldn't be easier. All you do is click on it and it brings you to this page. This page has a series of blocks. Whoops, let me go back. These blocks go way down. I'm just showing you the top. And the blocks start with the census on the top left because Ancestry and HeritageQuest and genealogist folks agree, start with the census. I'm going to tell you why in just a second, but you'll also see there are other things you can search from this search main page. And we're going to look in depth at a few of these in just a few minutes. Why start with the census? Well, as I said, It is every 10 years from 1790 until 1940. And just 13 months from now, we will have the 1950 census released. So we'll be able to find ourselves or perhaps our parents and grandparents in the 1950 census. But that's 13 months in the future. For now, HeritageQuest has every decade. What it's missing is 1890 because most of the census burned up in a fire. So you won't find 1890. There are fragments here and there, but they're really hard to find. What I really like about the 1850 and 1860 census and every census beyond is that every name was listed. From 1850 beforehand, let's say 1840, 1830, 1820, only the head of household was listed and a number of people by age. That means a lot of times women weren't named in the census. Now, if someone had been widowed, for example, and she was the head of household, you could very possibly find her if she was living on her own or was the so-called head of household. I have found, though, that sometimes they were, even though they were alive at the time, they may have been living with a male child, and he would claim head of household, and so she might not be listed by name. So lucky us, from 1850 on, you'll be able to find men, women, and children in the census by name. And all of these censuses on HeritageQuest have been indexed and transcribed. That means instead of you having to look at every page one by one, you can simply enter a name in the search box, and because it's been indexed, you will get a listing of results, some of which will not be correct, but some of which will be your ancestor. For almost all of these censuses, you'll be able to look at the census yourself, which I highly recommend because there's a lot of information in every census, and much of the information is not indexed or transcribed. So let's take a look at the kinds of things you'll find in the census collection on HeritageQuest. On the left are some of the kinds of census collections you'll find on HeritageQuest. You can click on any one. They're in blue. And as you know, anything in blue is almost always clickable online. So if, for example, you wanted to click the 1940 census and see where an ancestor was, you would click on the 1940 census. But there are other things, not just the population, that you can find. They're called special schedules. The regular census that you and I answered last year was a population schedule. They were asking us about the population. In previous years, however, other schedules asked about, for example, schedules of what they called at that time defective, dependent, and delinquent classes. Those were people who might have had physical or mental disabilities of different sorts. There were also schedules for people who had died in the 12 months prior to census day. And if you are lucky enough to be looking for someone who's not in the census, you should look here and you may find them. I found a number of my husband's ancestors had died in the 12 months before the actual US Census, and they were listed in one of these. I'm not going to show you one because I'm going to show you a different schedule, but I want to make you aware of this because if you find someone in one of these, you will have not just a name and a hometown and a county, but you'll have what that person died of, how long they had physical problems, and all kinds of other details about their illness and their death. So those can all be found here under non-population schedules or as a separate clickable site. Here, for example, you'll see there are slave schedules where enslaved populations were listed. Here's an 1890 census fragment. They know that there's very few folks who you can still find because most of the 1890 census burned up. So these are different things that you can look at when you look at the US Census. Here's an example of some of the details in the 1930 census, just as one example. The census was taken as of April 1, even though many people didn't answer until April, May, June, or sometimes later, because the enumerators went to every household. You're going to get an actual street address unless they're a farm, in which case they might not have a street address. You'll get every person who was in that household and a relationship. Now, the relationship might not be a child, a wife, or a husband. Sometimes the relationship is a boarder or a lodger or something else. So be aware you may find all kinds of relationships that you can then explore. They didn't just ask about the address. They wanted to know, was that residence owned by the householder or rented? What was the dollar value if it was owned? Was it a farm? And in 1930, radio was still a new technology. If you have someone in the 1930 census, you'll be able to see if they owned the new technology of radio. A lot of demographics. They want sex, race, age, marital status. Don't believe everything you see, by the way. Sometimes women in particular didn't tell the truth. If they were divorced, they might say they were widowed or single. I had any number of women do that, I found in my family tree. They asked about education. They asked about whether you could read or write, and birthplace, and wonderful birthplace of parents. They asked about citizenship and naturalization. Very important if you, like me, have immigrant ancestors that you're tracing in the census. On and on it goes. So that's why the census is a great place to start. And even if you've used the census in the past, I encourage you to go back. There's so much detail that maybe you didn't get it all the first time. Here's a few hints for when you're researching in the population records, which is what we usually think of as the census. Start with the most recent. Start with 1940. You probably have some idea of what the person's name was spelled like in 1940, and you may know something about the city or at least the state where that person was living in 1940. So start with 1940, and then you can always work backwards. When you look at HeritageQuest, they will tell you some of what the census asked, but they won't transcribe every single answer. For that, you need to look at the picture. A lot of times, as you probably know, people live near each other if they were in a family or if they were close friends. So take a look on the same page if you do find your ancestor, and maybe just click to look at the page before and the page after. Sometimes, in fact, families didn't make it onto one single census page. So even if you think you found the whole family, but they're at the top or the bottom of the page, take a look at the page before and the page after to see if you missed anybody. As you're looking, make note of some of the ages, because women in particular did not always tell the truth. So you're going to want to see if this is the right person. When you're dealing with a family name like Wood, for example, it's not always easy to know if I have the correct Wood family. I rely on names of everybody in the household as well as ages to try to figure out, do I have the right people? Look at the street address. Look at the occupation. Sometimes the occupation is the tiebreaker. Maybe you thought that you had an ancestor who was a butcher, but the census says this person is a florist. Might not be the same person. Keep looking. Remember to look at birthplaces and parents' birthplaces. That will help you get to vital records and get one generation back on your family tree. If you have immigrant ancestors, look carefully at the columns that ask about citizenship, because you may be able to find immigration records and naturalization records that will give you even more details. When you have the 1940, compare what you learn with the 1930 and the 1920 and so forth. I found with my immigrant ancestors, as time went on, for example, in the 1940, they couldn't remember the year they had come as well as they could maybe 2 years after they had come. So take it with a grain of salt. Things are not always accurate, but they're a really good starting point, and there's a lot of information. Some search tips. You can try the full name, and maybe if you're lucky, you happen to know somebody's middle name or middle initial, you can put that in. That may help you find the correct person. Maybe you're lucky and you have an ancestor with a unique first name. My husband's grandma was Floyda, Floyda. She was the only Floyda in that county. That helped me a lot because when you're looking at last names like Wood, you need all the help you can get. Some of my ancestors, and maybe yours, didn't use the birth first name. They chose to use their middle name. So experiment and maybe search by middle name and surname, not just first name. A lot of our ancestors used a nickname. My husband had a great aunt, Nellie. It took me a while to figure out that she didn't answer to her real name, which was Rachel Ellen. She was Nellie in every census. So try nicknames and see if that helps you. And don't be slavish about spelling. Sometimes the spelling is creative because the census taker didn't have to ask the person at every household, how do you spell that name? So my maiden name, Burke, was not spelled all the time correctly in the census. We spelled it B-U-R-K, but I found it in the census as B-U-R-K-E and B-E-R-K. So be creative. Think about if you know the state, add that in for your search, which I'll show you in a moment. If you know the county, add it in, but be prepared to take it out if you don't find anything. It's easier to find two people than it is to find one in isolation. So if you think you know the names of a husband and wife, or a brother and sister, or a mother and son in one household, try searching in those. And again, be flexible with the birth year because our ancestors didn't always tell the truth, or they didn't always know the exact year themselves. Here's what the search interface looks like when we're going to the census records on HeritageQuest. Those of you who have used Ancestry know this is very familiar because it's the same look to the search box. Very clean, very easy. You put in a first name here. You put in a last name here. You enter a city, county, state, or country, whatever you know. In this case, my grandpa, Isaac, used to say he was from Russia, and that's what I knew, so I put in Russia. It was only later I found out it wasn't really Russia at one point. It helps if you know where they were living at the time you're looking for them in a census. So in this case, like many of you, my grandpa and his ancestors, some of them, came over and started in New York City. And you can't see it here because I've blown this up large. I added a spouse, and that made it easier. Now, by the way, if you want to know more about the census, you'll see on the right, HeritageQuest gives you a lot of extras. They'll tell you something about the census. They'll also give you a blank form if you want to print it and look at it, because on the screen, sometimes it's difficult to see the little teeny tiny boxes. So it helps to know what the enumerator was asking. You can download a blank, and there's more search tips, and they give you that. I searched on Isaac Burke. The very first record, when I searched on him, was correct because I had just enough information. His wife's name, my grandma. I knew it was New York City. It turns out to be the Bronx. Birth year is about 1883. Birthplace, Russia, and he was the head. Now, I couldn't show you the entire image. What happens is they suggest that you look at the record. You can do that. See it over here on the left. But I really recommend you view the image. That's what that means. You click on that. Up comes the entire page, which I blew up so you could see part of it. You can read the headings fairly clearly, and you can see the handwriting. This is the 1940 census, which has a lot of details. You can see because they highlight that entire household. At this time, there were 4 people living in the household. So HeritageQuest highlights them for you. Now, let me tell you a couple of little tips for the 1940 census. This is only for the 1940 census. One is, here's this little X in a circle. Only in the 1940 census, the enumerator indicated which person from the household gave the information. That's a wonderful clue because, as I told you, women sometimes didn't tell the truth. So if a woman gave the information and the age looks funny to you, you'll have a clue why. But it also tells you she probably did know the names of her children, even if it's spelled incorrectly here because the enumerator was not required to say anything. Now, she gave the ages. I know this isn't true. She was older, but by 1940, she'd figured out that maybe in America, it was more customary for a wife to be younger, and she wanted to look Americanized. So she's suddenly the same age. Not true. Here's the citizenship column. This was very helpful because she told them that they were naturalized. So I could go looking for naturalization papers, and I was able to find them. There's a lot more information over here on the far right, occupation, number of hours worked, and so forth. But I just don't have room to show you on this page. Do take a look so that you can see for yourself all the great details in the census. That's the population schedule. I want to move on and show you a really good special schedule. This particular one is the 1890 Veterans Schedule, which was used specifically to try to find out about Civil War veterans. By 1890, many of the folks were still alive, not all, but many. And so in the 1890 census, which is now mostly burned up, but not the special schedules, if you have a man who was of military age, from 1860, let's say, to 1865, he might be listed in this, and you can use it as an 1890 census substitute. This tells you all about it. Let's take a look. When you click to search it, it's the same familiar search interface. Very clean, very easy to figure out. First and middle name. Surname. Death, I happen to have known. You don't have to know it for the 1890 Veterans Schedule, but I put it in. Do you know what county? If you don't, put in a state at the very least. You want to have enough so that you get search results, but not too restrictive. I put in the spouse on the possibility that perhaps she was listed as a widow. So when I put this in and I hit the search button, he was the very first name of only 5. There were only 5 because I was relatively restrictive. I wanted Steiner, I wanted Franklin, and I wanted Ohio. Now they've got Pennsylvania, but there were some matches they felt close enough for me to take a look. So first I viewed the record. I'm going to show it to you. And then I viewed the image. Here's what you get when you click View the Record. You get what folks transcribed. HeritageQuest and Ancestry had people transcribe this. So they looked at what they thought was the name and they typed it in. It may not be spelled correctly, but it's what they saw in the handwritten record. And here's information about sex and whether they were a veteran or a widow and so forth, and where they were living. And something about the year enlisted and discharged and the rank. But look, there's more information. They did not transcribe it. If you want a more complete idea of your ancestors' Civil War service, look at the image right here. What will happen is this will come up, something very much like this, an entire page of surviving soldiers, sailors, Marines, and widows, etc. The etc. may be dependents who are getting Civil War pensions. Now, I blew up the top of this to show you my husband's ancestor, but you can see already there's a lot of detail if you blow it up on your screen yourself. Here, number 3 on this list is Benjamin F. Steiner. He was a private in a certain company, a certain cavalry. It lists his exact enlistment and discharge dates, and it gives a lot more information. This is really a gold mine if you want to know more, and I really wanted to know more about this guy. Now, these are numbered. Let's say we're on page, I think, page 2 of this particular area, Todd and Dallas townships. So the ancestor, Benjamin, was not on line 3. He was really on line 15, according to them. So I looked at the bottom of the page where they list a post office address. They might have a disability if your ancestor had a disability that he was collecting on, and other remarks. In this case, number 15, it told me his post office address, Osceola, Ohio. He was not on disability. Some of these other folks were, and you might want to know, for example, here's somebody who was on line 21. His date of death, he died April 1, 1881, of cholera and diarrhea. If you didn't know his death date, this would tell you. It's a lot of information, folks. So if you have anybody who might have been in the Civil War, do take a look at the 1890 Veterans Schedule. I highly recommend it. Also, remember, anything you find, you go to the top right of the page and you can save it. You have a choice of either emailing it to yourself, or if you're sitting in your bunny slippers, save it to your computer. But don't use that option if you happen to be somewhere else. For example, someday when public buildings open and you're using a computer at the library, don't use this option because it'll save it to a public computer, which won't help you at all. Here's another example of a wonderful database in HeritageQuest. I went back to the search page at HeritageQuest, and right below the census is a box called Search City Directories. City directories are excellent because they're usually done in multiple years, whereas the census was only done every 10 years. Maybe you want to know where somebody was in, let's say, 1904 or 1894. You might not find them in a census, but you might find them in a city directory. I'm going to show you an absolutely wonderful example of a city directory. Here's the very familiar search interface. Another reason I love HeritageQuest, it's so clear and easy. There's not a lot of stuff on the page. I can focus easily on what I want to look at. I want to look at city directories, and I want to search by first name, last name, and so forth. If you want to know more about how to use city directories, they have a downloadable PDF guide, 6 things to find, and it's really very helpful. So fill in whoever you're looking for. It doesn't help if you have a name like Wood if you don't tell them roughly where. And you can't see everything, but you would put in at least a city or a county and a state. Here's what I did for my husband's grandfather, whose name was James Edgar Wood. I put him in as James E. because I wasn't sure he would use the Edgar. I knew that he lived in Toledo. And he didn't have a spouse at this point, but I knew he was living with his father. So I put in his father's name, or at least I was pretty sure, because he had not yet married. And the year I was looking for 1898. So I put that in, and then I hit the search button. Now, what came up at the very top was 1895. 1898 was further down. So I decided to take a look at 1895 first. And the reason is the way the HeritageQuest search algorithm works, there are more hits on the information I put in on the top record. There are fewer things that correlate to what I put in on lower records. And a number of these are just outright not my person. But 1895 was. In fact, so was 1898. I discovered later on he had moved by 1898. Okay, you could look at the record, but don't bother. Please just go right to the image. Here's why. You'll get usually 2 pages. This is great for 2 reasons. One is you can see at a glance whether the name Wood continues on to another page, goes before, because remember, you should look and keep looking because there may be people who are related to your person just one line at the top of the next page, or perhaps on the bottom line of the previous page. The second reason is you want to look at everybody with that last name. Now, HeritageQuest helpfully told me, here's your James E. Wood. But I didn't just look at that. Let me blow it up and show you why. Here's the 1895 Toledo City Directory. He was not an only child, far from it. He had many siblings, and I looked for them on the page, starting with the A's. Alfred O. Wood. I knew that that was a familiar name. It tells me that he died at what age. It gave me an exact death date, so I could look elsewhere for an obituary and look for his death record. This is so important, getting extra info like this. It isn't just where they worked or where they lived. Here's another one of his siblings, Charles A., which I happen to know was a sibling. Then you keep going down. Here's Frank E., another sibling, but look, he's been removed. So he moved elsewhere, and he is in the Dearborn, Michigan directly. So learn some of these terms because they're unique to city directories, and you'll have more clues. Down here is my husband's grandfather, James E. Wood, and it says he BDS, he boards. That means he lives in the household, but he's not the head of household. Somebody else would be RES, resides there, and usually that would be the head of the household. So take a look and see what some of these abbreviations are and see who else you can find. Jane A. Wood, one of James's sisters, was also boarding at 414 South. You can't see it here, but Thomas Haskell Wood, who was the head of household, was the actual guy who was RES at 414 South. All of this came out of the 1895 Toledo City Directory, It's a fabulous resource, folks. So see if your ancestors were in a city directory and how many years. Remember, they may have moved, they may have been removed, siblings may have moved in and out. Take a look. This is kind of a quick look. I'm going to show you how wills and probate work. There are some wills and probate documents available, but it's spotty coverage. I'm lucky enough that my husband has a lot of Ohio ancestors. And remember, a lot of folks from the Northeast went to Ohio. So if you're lucky enough, you may find Ohio. Now, of course, there's also New York. Not every county, but there's New York. So take a look and see if you're able to find someone. Your best bet is to try to search by the state. So you can't see it, but below here they have alphabetical listings. Or if it's Ohio or New York, you can click right at the top. I clicked on Ohio because my husband had Ohio ancestors, and you can search or browse. A search means you enter something in the search interface, and then you would click the word search. But you can also browse, and I had to do both. What happened is, I believe that Samuel Hilborn died in 1905 in Wyandotte County, Ohio. I didn't find his will or his probate, so I looked on a map for that era and looked at what was the adjacent county. And I clicked on the county, and there's a drop-down menu that I'm not going to show you. And what happened was I found the adjacent county and I browsed. The adjacent county was Crawford County. And sure enough, I found him in a set of records that began in 1904. So I didn't have very far to browse. Browsing meant I had to click to look at every image. But it was worth it, because here's Samuel L. Hilborn. I didn't know his middle name. And it told me that he had been in the township of Todd in Crawford County. Here's the name of his widow. And look at the list of kin who were named in his will. Now, how lucky am I? It gave married name of a daughter. I might not have been able to find this otherwise. It told relationships. Now, sometimes you will find somebody listed as a grandson or a granddaughter. You may find an in-law or a stepchild. And look, it told me where they were living also in the year 1905. Isn't this wonderful? So keep in mind that even if you have to browse, you may very well be able to find a lot of great information for your genealogy research. Let's look at another database in HeritageQuest. This is just a quick look. Military research. They have a lot of Revolutionary War pension and bounty land. That means if your ancestor had qualified to get a free land grant or some kind of a low-paying land grant, you might find it in here. There are Confederate prisoner of war records here. And then all kinds of assorted international, Colombia, Germany, and so forth. So it's worth taking a look, but there isn't a lot here beyond these if you're looking for America. There's just a few, but it's worth at least taking a look. Another quick look, a limited collection of immigration records, and it's an oddball collection in my humble opinion. But again, you might be lucky. You might be looking for somebody who was naturalized in New Jersey. You could search right here by clicking Search Now. I, of course, searched the Ohio for my husband's folks. And then there's these very oddball different things. Some of them, by the way, are indices. They're not actual records. You would have to go elsewhere to look for the actual records. So I'm not going to demonstrate it, but I wanted you to know that it was in HeritageQuest, because maybe you're lucky and have somebody in New Jersey that you want to look up. Here's something that used to be widely available for free online easily. It's not as widely available, but HeritageQuest has it for free. Anybody who had a Social Security number from 1935 to 2014 and whose death was reported to Social Security would very likely be in this index. I've used it to go looking for ancestors that I couldn't find. I also used it, frankly, to look for cousins if I wasn't sure if they were still alive or not. So it gave me a sense of whether I should be searching for them in other places. It also gave me some information about when and where some of these folks died, so I could look for obituaries, maybe cemetery records, or death records. So I'm not going to show you because it's a very simple search box. Take a look and use it. But I am going to demonstrate the search cemetery site because, again, this is one of my favorites. This searches Find a Grave. Find a Grave is owned by Ancestry, and it is a volunteer site where people go to cemeteries and upload photos and names of gravestones. Sometimes it's not photos. Sometimes it's simply a list of names they obtained from the cemetery or they found in other places, and they knew that those folks were in a certain cemetery. I like to use this often instead of the Find a Grave site itself, which you can find at findagrave.com. Let me show you why I like this. First of all, it's a targeted search. Remember before I told you that targeted search often gets you better results higher on the page. Here I can say, I only want to look at US, or maybe I'm looking for UK and Ireland, or there's a growing amount of Canada. So these are some of the places you could search by clicking. It'll be more targeted. They have a small number of Australia and New Zealand, for example, and others. But if you search by location, usually you'll get better results higher up. And I'm going to demonstrate. This is a very clean and easy to use search box. I like it better than Find a Grave because, frankly, the Find a Grave site is very colorful and doesn't have as easy a looking search interface. This is white. I can see it, with or without glasses. Remember I told you earlier about my husband's grandma with the unusual name? She is a lot easier to find when I know where I'm looking for her, even if I had just put in Florida and Ohio. But I knew what her last name was, and I knew where she was buried. So, or where she died, I should say. Now, if you wish, you can put in other information, but I started with this. And the very second result was her. The first was not her. So it was interesting to see what was happening. She was not Floyda H, but she was Floyda M. And she was buried in Upper Sandusky. Now here, you have to view the record first, and that turns out to be a plus. And just for your information, it's sometimes helpful to look at the other results that are close to the top of the page, because if you have a not unusual name, maybe there are two Mabel McClures, you want to check them both. In this case, I know for a fact her middle name was Mabel. So let's take a look. I clicked to view the record. This is what came up. This is the summary of what Find a Grave has about Floyda Mabel McClure: a birth date, a birthplace, a death date, a death place, her cemetery, and where the cemetery is located. And look at this other information. Now, as I told you, Find a Grave is a volunteer-maintained site. Somebody put this up voluntarily. It means you can't always trust it. The volunteer may not have known, may have been working from a record that either was transcribed incorrectly or was incomplete or downright wrong. So there are two ways you can look for yourself. You can click over here, if there's a picture, to go to the website, or you can click here under URL. Either way, you get to Floyda, Mabel, Steiner, McClure's Find a Grave page. And this is such a rich page. There's a lot on it. Look at the clues to all the other family members who were not summarized on that other page that you saw. You needed to click through and take a look. Now remember, this is volunteer done. It may not be correct. You need to always check it for yourself. But there are parents and where they're buried. There are siblings, including somebody I might not have known about because this infant died young, one of her siblings. There are others who died young also who I might not have known about, and I can learn more about looking for obits or death records. Her spouse, her child. There's so many wonderful clues on this page in Find a Grave, and it was easy to find through HeritageQuest. There are other databases that we just don't have time to look at. And so, as I mentioned to you, go looking. Take a look at the guides, the mortality schedules. If you're looking in the 19th century, you may find someone there. Agricultural and industrial schedules. Those are censuses taken on the 1890, 1900, and so forth, that list who owns farmland or livestock land and what they did, who owned a business. There's a lot of information, including Canadian census records. In those cases, you can't always look at the image, but it's worth looking. Why? Because there's a lot on it and it's free. Did I mention it's free?
Mm.
So I want to thank you, folks. And I'm going to put back on my video